Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for tuning in. Christopher here with Studio GDT, and we've got a very special guest with us today, Tone Deaf from Tone Deaf Sound that you might follow on various platforms. And Tone, I'm super stoked to have you here with us today.
Same. I'm excited to be here, man. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So before we get right into it, just full disclosure, I got three kiddos running around in the background. So if you hear any gremlin type noises or someone sounding like Gary Busey running
Same.
through the halls, it's kids. So we're
Yeah,
we're, we're
same here. If you hear pounding on the door, it's them.
yeah, that's my concern too. Is I got the door locked and they might be pounding. So.
Right.
Uh, But again, thanks for tuning in. This is our my first live stream here with a guest, and I'm very thankful that it is Tone of all people. When I first started trying to do the soul world, I, I did a lot of research online, and the one thing that kind of came up where there's some repeat people, right? And their videos kept popping up, and he was one of them. And it was really an inspiration to see what could be done and what products were out there. So I thought he would be a perfect guest to talk to first and kind of ask some questions about. Maybe might I've got questions, right? And it might be something that you guys might be interested in learning about. So for me, anytime I meet someone that's into these, one of the things I always like to ask is, when did your kind of fascination, if that's what it is, with
Yeah.
Japanese style swords? When did that begin in your life? And then when did that actually turn into something that you started acquiring swords and started practicing
Yeah.
with them?
So it's kind of weird. There's a really huge gap between when I got like back into it and when I was into it originally. When I was a child, like I was probably like 10 or 11, my dad took me to meet his father's really good friend. They were both dentists. And he said, "Hey, I know you're into like swords. My dad's friend is an avid Japanese sword collector. So basically had a bunch of Nihonto right in front of me. And I was 11 and I got to hold like 1400s, 1500s, 1800s, just Japanese blades. And it was the history, the way they're forged, the way they used steel that wasn't great to make amazing things. So from there, it was kind of just like up until probably high school, I was like into it kind of, and I was more into like souls. They have historical weapons inside of it, and I've always liked the more historically accurate kind of things in general. But yeah, as a kid, I was into it. I loved it. I thought it was so cool. And then I just kind of fell completely in love with music in high school, and that just kind of took my life over, which was amazing. I got to be in tons of different bands and all this different stuff, but swords were not on my brain at all at that point. You know, it kind of just like I get tunnel vision on things I enjoy, and so it's like sometimes I'll take a 180 and everyone will be like, "What the heck? I thought you were this," and I'm like, "Well, I still am, but I'm also really into this," you know. So around, I want to say 2022,
Okay.
somebody was like talking to me online and I had posted this just like picture of a random sword, and I was like, "Oh, if anyone wants to get this from me for my birthday, LOL." And they were like, "Oh yeah, I'll buy it for you." And I was like, "Wait, what?" And they're just like a random like online fan I had, and so it was just this like I actually still have it. It's this like Shinwa Odachi, like a really really crappy one. But from there, I was like hooked because I was like, "Oh, this thing can actually cut. I just cut a milk jug in half. This is crazy." And so I think what kind of reignited my spark was that uh, backyard cutting is really fun. It's like it's addicting, and so I started to do that, and then Kingfisher and Katana Carl and Space Ghost, those there I see them in the chat. they kind of just stumbled on my channel and I stumbled on theirs, and they were like, "Yo, nice double cut. Hey, good job." Like, and we just kind of traded back and forth, and they also were like listening to the music I was making too. So it just kind of naturally happened. It was a hobby I was really afraid to even post because the comments. It's like, "Oh, you cringe lord, like you're so lame," and that's exactly what I got right when I first started.
Of
And
course.
so
Yeah.
and it was just kind of a like, you know what? I don't care. I'm almost 30. I'm just gonna do whatever I want. And it was just this fun experience because I went from being kind of just a like, oh, I'll just cut stuff in the backyard to being like, oh, this is really fun and I feel pretty good at this. So I just kind of kept going. But yeah, it was a massive like probably 10-year gap between that encounter with my dad's friend and then actually going, whoa, these are really cheap now. Like when I was a kid, a Musashi brand katana was like $600, and now
Absolutely.
you can get them for like 50. So it's the market has shifted, which made it really fun because I was like, oh, I have a little bit of money, I'm gonna just get these because they're $100. It's like it's pretty cool to see where it's gone. And I took such a big break that I wasn't one of the people who saw it go from very limited to very wide.
That's
So yeah,
it's interesting because I wonder how many people have had who are not maybe, let's say, lifelong martial artists, right? And kind of had I'll say luxury. It's not meant to be offensive, but the luxury of being near schools where they could train,
yeah,
right? Because
yeah,
it's hard enough to find traditional martial arts schools these days, let alone something like Iaido or Kenjutsu, right?
for sure.
And I'm sure plenty never came back after COVID. I'm sure they
That's
shut down and
definitely,
never came back.
yeah.
So I know for me, uh, my trajectory and kind of like my history was not so different from yours. Um, you know, uh, Being born in the early '80s and growing up through all the action films, it was like Ninja Central, right?
Oh, for sure.
You
Yeah.
know, I think back then I thought a hot pink D like Michael Dudikoff in American Ninja was awesome, and now I look and I'm like, what was I thinking? Like I could not wear that today.
Nah, but I
Yeah,
get it. I
you
get
know what
it.
I
That's
mean?
that's awesome.
Um, so that kind of kicked it off for me as a kid. But those movies, the action films started to die off a little bit when that kind of like Japanese injection of culture in America in the '80s started to die off a little bit. And then it probably wasn't until like the release of Ninja Scroll, right, on
Mhm.
DHS, where I was like, man, I want to
Dude,
run through a forest of bamboo and swing a sword and have everything fall down around me,
so
right?
so fire. That's one of the
so,
sickest animes.
so around that same time, I got my first and only wall hanger set. It was a 440 stainless steel daisho, and
Shout out.
I went out and stood under my tree and just swung that thing and
Hell yeah.
let the leaves fall around me. And my dad came out and was like, "What the hell are you doing? Pick all that up." So, um, Carl loved Ninja Scroll exactly. So you know what I mean.
Yeah,
I'd
it's
turn and look at my
fire.
dad and I'd be like, "A storm's coming," and then I'd ninja run out to the backyard with my sword. So,
My
yeah,
anime was my anime was Samurai Champloo. Like in high school, I was like, this is the shit.
which different generation, probably film that had the exact same impact, or series that
For
had the
sure.
exact same impact, right?
Well, it's funny because Samurai Champloo had Nujabes, which is the Japanese hip hop artist. He was the beat maker, and his music actually got me into making like lo-fi hip hop, which I can do. I've been doing it for a very long time, and I remember when it wasn't even called lo-fi; it was
Right.
called like uh, blunted beats or low beats or like just hip hop beats. So I don't know, it's just a cool cultural thing. Both of those are huge cultural impact on different generations. So
Right.
yeah, that's awesome.
Then, at about in 2000, I moved from where I lived to Albuquerque, New Mexico, where there was a Kenjutsu dojo that had been there for quite a long time. So I said, "Hey, I'm actually gonna do this. Like,
Yeah,
I'm gonna do this." But in 2000s, right, pretty much everybody at the dojo had Nihonto, right? Um,
yeah,
the like Paul Chen. practical wasn't quite accepted yet, and they were at that point in time, they were like $700+. You know, then you
The
had
entry was really high.
right, you
Yeah,
had Bugay, and
for
they
sure.
were $1,500+. And at the time, uh, 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 a Gunto, a short, tiny Gunto, is going to set you back like 5 grand. So at the
Yeah.
time, I found a sword from Last Legend, which was about $600, and that's what got me started. And
Wow.
I trained for about 3 years, and then I had to move. And then just like you, I had like a 20-year gap
Yeah.
before picking it back up. And I thought, well, I better start looking online, YouTube reviews, and
Mhm.
and that's where I ran across Carl's channel, Matt's channel, your
Of
channel,
course.
Space Ghost,
Yeah.
Gargoyle, everybody. It's like a crew, and
Yeah.
it's awesome. And then I started looking at these swords, and I was like, wait a tick, like
Yeah.
250
T10 for
bucks,
200?
350
What?
bucks,
Yeah.
and I don't have to wait 7 months for it.
Yeah, it's down
So
the road at Amazon.
exactly.
Yeah.
So now I gotta ask this, because if I ever had a question about a Nodachi, right? There's probably one person that I would immediately come to my mind, and I would ask, and hey,
I
who
appreciate that.
wasn't impacted by Final Fantasy VII and
Yeah.
Sephiroth's Nodachi? You know what I mean? But how did that become a thing for you? How did that become like your trademark?
So I started studying like just history in general for Japan. Like once I got a sword. So the first one that I got, I'll grab it real quick. Actually, this is the one that was a gift. So I rewrapped this because it had a very bad handle. But I rewrapped this one, and it's the classic black Damascus. Just looks like crap. But it was the one that I got because it just was the first one I found, and I posted like a joke post about it. But when I got it, I was like, "Oh, this is actually kind of my size." And I started studying history, and there's a few different people who use Nodachi. There's obviously Kojiro from like the Edo period, early Edo. But somebody who a lot of people don't know about is Magara Naoitoka, who was he was a guard. I think I can't remember the clan's name, but he basically went up against Oda Nobunaga, and he did like a last stand with this shrine Nodachi that was like 7 feet long because he was like a 6.5 foot Japanese guy, so he was basically a giant. I was dumb inspired by that. I was like, that is the sickest thing I've ever heard. I don't know if it was really real. Who cares? It's cool. And I was like, I want to challenge myself. I want to be a YouTuber who uses an Odachi because they're few and far between. There's hardly anybody online who, let alone uses one, but also cuts with one.
Right.
And so there's a lot of people in Japan who use the like zinc alloy ones that are big and light and easy to whip around. And I was like, I really want to kind of do this old school. I'm gonna ask a smith for a huge one. And so I hit up Kanban Forge and I was like, what's the biggest 1060 blade you can do? And they were like 120 centimeter Nagasa or blade length. And I was like, sick, done. And they gave that thing to me, I think, for $300. So it's just like, it was just cool. And so when I got it, I was like, cool, this thing's 6 pounds. This is heavy. So it was cool because it got me to start working out. I started doing more strength training to be able to use it, and it was kind of like I read that story about that samurai in real history, got really inspired, and was like, I want to just be this weird niche kind of person and use it to cut. And so that's why I commissioned Kanban Forge. And then I found a couple other places that were like pre-made that sell like longer ones. And so I bought those too. But Nodachi just really inspired me because there's a huge amount of working with the weapon instead of just whipping the weapon around. So you kind of have to like get yourself to a certain dexterity and a certain strength to even use it. And it felt like a video game, like when your character's not high enough level to use the weapon you got.
Yeah.
And so it was a fun like kind of experiment for me. I was like, can I get to the point where I can do double cuts with it? Can I get to the point where I can draw it? And I just watched. I watched a lot of people in Japan because it's funny. There's more people in Japan who use Nodachis, at least on the internet, than there are in the U.S. Uh, I don't know why that is. I think it has to do with like a couple different schools do it as kind of a litmus test for like being a like high rank. So I watched like random videos I found online, and I kind of just studied how they drew the weapon. And they do this thing where they pull it like way back, and then they hold the very edge of the blade like right by the
Yep.
habaki,
Yep.
and then they kind of let it drop down and grab it, and it's the sketchiest thing in the world. But it's also, once you do it a million times, it's the same as normal Noto at that point. But
Yeah.
it's really really cool to be able to kind of be an outlier in the cutting backyard cutting world, because there's like maybe 10 videos you can find of people actually cutting with Nadachi, like big ones. So it's hard. It's hard to find, and so I was like, I'm gonna challenge myself. I want to be that person. And when you type in double Nodachi, that's me, you know. And it was kind of a like, okay, can I get that strong? Can I do that? Can I learn it? And so I just wanted to, you know.
Well, the funny thing about swordsmanship, right, is you can't um, you can't go to a gym and get on a weight machine, right, and hit a weight machine and work out all the necessary muscles that you need to work out for getting better at swords. You have to
No,
swing swords, right?
yeah,
And that's you know if you increase weight of that's why they have suburito, right?
yeah,
It's you move up in weights on that, and then you go back down to your normal sword, and then all of a sudden it's like, hey, this feels like a rapier in my hand, right?
for sure,
So
yeah,
through your duration of sticking that, I mean, you probably have developed physiologically, like a fantastic set of sword swinging muscles, right?
yeah,
So it's really interesting. I've always Nodachi have always been interesting too, and I remember playing second edition Dungeons and Dragons with my friends in high school, being like, "I want the Nodachi though. Like, I want the
that's
Nodachi,"
sick.
and they're like, "But you realize you could roll like 2 ones with that." And I'm like, "I don't care. Can I draw my character now?"
Yeah,
So, but it is pretty impressive just to especially I think you film you have to film at a distance, right? Because you're covering so much ground and the sword covers so much ground. I
yeah,
think it almost minimizes what you're accomplishing, right? If someone has is swung around a 30-inch Nagasa, right? They'll know what I'm talking about. Now add 11 more inches to that or something,
yeah,
and
yeah.
it's pretty crazy. So it's definitely impressive that you kind of found that niche and stuck with it, and I love it. I think it's really cool to have something that is unique out there. Everybody kind of brings something unique to the table, and I
Totally.
think that's what makes this community really cool.
Agreed. I think it's interesting because Space Ghost and I were talking about this. I'm also like an avid snowboarder, and I've been snowboarding like most of my life. But we were saying it's backyard cutting, or just kind of like videos about swords in general, are kind of like when a skater or somebody has a really distinct style. There's ones who are really good at like big air, and there's ones who are good at like grinding, and they get really really specific on one thing. And I think what I've liked about the Nodachi is it forces my brain to focus on one thing. And I stopped buying shorter swords because I was like, it's got to be at least above 30 inches for me, especially because with my height, that's more my size. But also, I just started being like, okay, if this is what is working for me, I enjoy it, and it's making me unique, I'm just going to keep going. And I think that's kind of what inspired it. Was I was like, this is my signature. This is my footprint on the internet world, you know?
Yeah, and it's definitely probably a lasting one at this point, I would say, and that isn't to mention that you don't have other things to be able to kind of be proud of. Me for one, I'm a huge fan of your music.
Appreciate that.
It fits right into my category of I used to be a very narrow-minded individual, especially when it came to music. Right around when I entered a high school, it was all punk rock and everything like that, and everything else was sell out this and sell out
Yeah.
that, mainstream this, mainstream that. And then I had to get a job, and I got a job at a record store chain called The Warehouse, and that just like blew my brain.
That's so cool.
Some countries have mandatory service or something like that. If we still had record stores, I'd say everybody has to work in a record store for 1 year of their life.
That's really cool.
It'll change their outlook. And when I came across your music, I was like, man, this is awesome. And I really appreciate that you have loaned some of your work to our videos here in one end.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was funny that one of my favorite songs is called the Quickening, which for me is an obvious Highlander reference, right? Another one of the movies and series that always kind of kept me tied to Japanese swords and whatnot. So
Highlander was so cool. My dad showed me that and was like, "This is the sickest movie you'll ever see."
It was, and then they had the TV series run for a while, and it was just great stuff. So
yeah.
What if you could maybe if there was anything that you would looking back on, how you've done things and kind of the swords that you bought. Is there anything that you do differently today? Knowing what you know now. I know it kind of started fairly recently, just like
Yeah.
LinkedIn, so we haven't had a ton of time to look back and reflect. But is there anything you wished you would have started doing in the beginning, especially for people who are maybe tuning into this that they haven't started collecting or they haven't started buying swords?
I think one of the things you should do, I think it's not really a regret, it's just kind of a learning curve, but I think look into what steels do what. Like I think people drop in and then they get this misconception that they need like the super steel, like they need the S7 and I'm going to spend $1 million to cut rocks in half and I see people just getting disappointed by a sword that was probably perfectly adequate and for real cutting, which is tatami, bamboo, milk jugs, and pool noodles. I don't think people should be cutting anything else. Personally, that's my belief. I think when I first started, I tried to cut everything, and I regret doing that. I have a Drem sword that's absolutely beat to shit because I fell into the same trap of thinking, well, a samurai sword, just cut everything, and I cut bunch of dry cardboard with it, but just bad. But I didn't know any better, and so I would say, look at figure out exactly what you would like to cut. Look at what traditional mediums there are. Look at what backyard cutting mediums there are, and figure it out because you might spend $3 grand on something you technically don't need. I think there's a lot of push to buy the super steels, and I think if you're gonna cut bamboo, the super steels are sick. Yes, definitely buy that because you won't have to think about your your edge rolling or your sword snapping or your sword bending. I think that a lot of people don't even really realize that they're probably good with a $200-$300 1060 sword with the bells and whistles.
Right.
And I think that a lot of times there's a huge amount of just people get it in their head that they got to have this indestructible blade, and I'm like, well, edge alignment isn't that hard. It's once you do it like 30 times, you're good. And I think people are probably fine with 9260 or 1060 steel. And for those of you who don't know, if you're watching, those are just mono steels. They don't have a hamon. They usually are just one long kind of sword of just one type of steel. And so I think people spend a lot on folded steel and S7 and the S5 shock steels because they think they either need like a traditional blade or they need the indestructible. So I would say just study steels, figure out exactly what you're going to do. If you have a ton of bamboo and you know you're going to cut it, then maybe don't start with something with a really hard edge like 1095, but even that can probably pop right through some bamboo pretty easily if the heat treatment is good. It's just that I think younger kids who start out want indestructible, and that might be exactly what they need, but I think a lot of times they're just cutting pool noodles.
Well, I mean,
So
there's a lot of marketing behind it too, right? It's kind of like
yeah,
in in my industry, in the accessory world, like if you talk about like tactical lights, right? It's the lumens game. You need all the lumens. Like, well, do you really? Like, have you ever
yeah,
been in a pitch black hallway with white walls and turned on a 5,000 lumen light? Like, everybody's blind. Your neighbors are blind.
yeah,
They didn't go to them,
100%.
right? So, you don't really. You're right. You probably don't need that for what your application is. So,
Yeah,
I definitely like when I've dealt with some forges that do custom work and they interact with you about your requests, right? Because
yeah,
in some cases, people will be like, "Oh, you want to spend money on that? Cool, no problem." Right? But very rarely do you get someone say, "Well, you don't really need to do that." And
yeah,
then, as far as like the kind of like the Japanese myths that are out there, I remember hearing one when I was a kid, right? And I bet somebody else in the chat has heard this one, that there was a Marine on Iwo Jima and he had his machine gun and he was
oh
just
yeah,
running it and the barrel was red. Yes! So
yeah,
it, right? And
yeah,
the guy popped up and his sword went right through the barrel, cut it like butter, right? So, we know that didn't happen, right? And we also know, like, metallurgically, right?
yeah.
1060 was kind of the equivalent of where they got. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's true. They had, what was it, cable steel, I think, or was it railroad or something? They had Japanese railroad steel, I think, is what
Yeah,
I heard.
yeah.
I think that might have been RVA telling us that at some
Railroad
point.
ties were being used there at that point in time. But even, on some of the historical examples, if you were to take a look at, like the hardness of it, right? They're pretty much working with like the equivalent of modern 1060 steel. So I mean, they didn't have super seals, right?
Yeah,
If you would have
no,
took one, if you would have took a $33,000 Nihonto and spin it around on its back and hit it on its spine, this is probably going to snap. You know what I mean?
yeah, for sure.
So I kind of agree with that too. I think about how much money could be spent and where you're sending it versus where it could go and kind of make you happy. Like, instead of spending an
Yeah,
extra $500 on a blade, maybe that money goes to the Tsuka and the Ito, and
for sure.
it feels better in the hand, or you get a higher
Absolutely.
quality saya or something like that.
The Suka is like massively important to me, to the point where if I buy a budget sword, I just lacquer it preemptively so that it doesn't go flying on me, because I don't care anymore. I'm so sick of Ito getting loose, and I think that was like when you start in the budget realm, it comes with the territory. But it's like now if I get a sword, even this Hanwei that I just got, I just lacquered it right away because I was like, Hanwei's notorious for the loose Ito. It's it works though, and I like things to be tight, but there's something to be said with thinking intentionally. Like, okay, maybe we should add the Hishigami, maybe we should add the Silk Ito to this customization. Maybe we should make sure the smith knows I want it much thinner or much wider on the Suka. Like, I think those are things you don't know until you start swinging it around and you go, God, this feels awful.
Right,
It's like,
right.
and I think that that's just kind of a preference based thing because everyone's hands are different. I'm actually kind of more prone to liking the long sukas. Basically, my whole rack over here is a minimum of 13 inches. So I like the longer suka style, like 14, 15, 16, even 17. The big Nodachi I have is a 17-inch suka, which is absolutely massive. But it helps me get a certain amount of like leverage, and since I'm working with longer blades, it's kind of hard because the standard size, the 27-inch size, is not really, doesn't feel good to me. It feels weird. I feel like it's a one-handed sword. And so if I would have kind of noticed that earlier on, I probably wouldn't have bought so many duplicates of like 27-inch, 28-inch blades, and just really spent my time and money on 35, 34-inch kind of range, because those feel like a normal sword to me. The Drem sword that I picked up, this one, it's kind of like it's what I would take to a dojo in a sense if I were to do that. It feels like a normal size to me. It doesn't feel huge or weird. It's extremely easy for me to draw and sheath it, and I have no problem doing that. But to a lot of people, this would be like a whole lot of sword. Like, it's still 34 inches. You know, it's big. But I think I would have spent more money on things like this early on if I would have realized, okay, this short katana, it doesn't do anything for me, and I honestly just am not having fun with it. I ended up gifting a lot of my original purchases to people because they were just sitting on the shelf not being used, and they weren't expensive. So it wasn't like some sort of nice, like, oh, look at that pretty one. It was just like a cheap Amazon, beater sword. So I think for me, I would hope people take a little bit of time because it's really exciting when you first get your first sword and you're like, this thing can cut something. That's so cool. But then I think people get the fever and they're like, okay, well, I got to buy every single katana I see. And they don't figure out what they actually like, or if they even want to stick with the hobby. But I kind of
Right.
realized I want to stick with the hobby, So it's like that's I don't know. That's just kind of my thoughts on it. Hopefully that made sense. I rambled.
Yeah, I know, absolutely. And what's interesting is I do think, um, if you're talking about, there was one video I did about uh, Kasaki at some point in time, and how, like, Okasaki is only Okasaki in relation to the length of the blade, right? Depending on the length of the blade, it might not be O, right? It could end up being two. But
Yeah.
what's interesting is, if when you think about Tsuka, right, um, it is directly related to it should be directly related to the length of the blade as well, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're talking about techniques to prevent an opponent from drawing their sword, one of them is stopping their draw with your tsuka, right?
Right.
But if they decided that they wanted to continue attack, you're still going to need to be able to get your sword out and have the appropriate distance between the two of you. So if you've got this big old honking long Nodachi, right,
Yeah.
you need to be able to stop them from drawing their sword, but you need to do that from, like, across the room. So
Yeah.
you take that 17-inch Suka and you say, hey, cut that out, don't do that.
Yeah.
Don't do it. And then you've still got the distance to be able to make that cut with it. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense. I mean, could you imagine a 41-inch Nagasa with a, 11-inch Suka? It just doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah. It's interesting because I bought this one. This is from a samuraisword.com, which is like the most lame name of all time, but they still sell big Nodachis. A lot of the companies switched over to the like 35-inch one, the bare minimum to call it a Nodachi, which makes sense because forging these is annoying. But this has a really short ska for a 120 centimeter blade or 47-inch blade. This is only, I think, 13 inches.
That is
So
for sure.
if for the size, that would be like a wakizashi handle on a normal katana.
Right.
And so what's weird about this one is I picked it up going, I want another one because I don't want to just have a big Nodachi that could potentially break and then not have anything else to train with. So I picked this one up thinking it was going to be hell to use, and I found it much easier to use. It's interesting because they put a fuller on it. So it's kind of hard to see, but it's got a fuller and it cut the weight like dramatically. And so I can even use this one with like one hand sometimes to do cuts, and it performs really well. It's a mono steel 1095, works great, cuts through like anything I need it to. But I was really worried about it when I picked it up. I'm like, that ska is so short for the length. Like, is this even going to work? And it somehow did. And so it's kind of weird. Sometimes there's outliers. It really depends on the relationship between the geometry itself and the ska. So sometimes the geometry lends to a really super tip heavy kind of feel, or like with this one, a lot of the mass is kind of centered here. So there's a lot more rotational ability, and it feels kind of just like a really big katana now. So
Mhm.
it's kind of cool to feel the difference from Smiths to like the dimensions, the geometry. I feel like it plays a way bigger part in the feel of it than people tend to realize when they start.
100%. I would agree with that as well. Um, Going back to a comment you made earlier, it made me think about something. We were talking about how you don't see a ton of we'll call them professional Nodachi videos, right?
Yeah,
Nodachi videos out of dojos or whatnot. And I was
for
just
sure.
thinking about, in my Ryu, right? You don't start getting into what you would call like alternative weapons until you're pretty much at the upper echelon of that.
Yeah,
So you think about not a ton of people getting into um, traditional martial arts anymore, right? And there's probably a huge gap between like the people that currently are at that level and like their age
yeah,
versus the people who are not at that level and are maybe more involved in social media and recording things. Like I think about Shogo, right,
yeah.
and Seki Sensei, and it's kind of incredible that he's willing to sit in front of a camera
For
and
sure.
and
For
do all this.
the techniques he's doing are killing techniques. They're straight up like real koryo or however you pronounce that. Um, which is cool. But you're right. I think a lot of them are probably hidden out in Japan and can do crazy things that they don't want to show us for good reason, to keep
Yeah,
the lineage alive. It does
right,
make sense.
right. So that's another thing that's really neat just about what you're doing, because if someone is really into that, right, there's some source material. Like I've got in my library, I've got the Fumbun Tanaka books and whatnot, and there's some cool pictures of some Nodachi techniques and the
Yeah,
Nodachi draw that you were describing earlier. But it's like I want to see that. Like somebody show
yeah,
me that.
for sure. Well, and I don't want to sit here and be an authority on it. I always try to say like I'm not classically trained, so I learned from myself essentially, and a lot of source material that I found. But I'm not going to ever sit there and say I've studied this and I've gotten this rank and this is the style I do. I just tell people this is what I figured out with the weapon while it was in my hand. And this is like I don't want you to think I'm training you because I don't feel qualified. But here's some advice. I've only done a couple videos like that because I don't really like to. I would rather just let the cuts or my swings speak for themselves, and if people want to correct me, they can tell me whatever I need to, and I'll try it. If they say like, hey, try this, your arm should do this, okay, cool, I'll try it. And because I don't consider myself aligned to a school. Now if I could find a school close to me that was like, yeah, we only practice nodachis, I'd be like, sick, I'm there. But I don't have a lot of time. I have very limited windows to get out there and cut, and that's kind of like, okay, cool, I'm going to keep doing it, and it's working. We're in a different kind of era where a lot of people have access to this stuff now, and so my first priority though for people, if they ever ask me for advice, is just safety. Like if you're going to work with sharps, throw some gloves on, especially when you start out, because it's just too easy to cut yourself. It's just ridiculously easy, and it's always when you don't expect it. It's when you're transporting gear. It's usually not when you're cutting like things, or it's usually not when you're working with other people. It's when you're doing something mundane, and then all of a sudden your fingers cut. And I just tell people like treat them like guns. They're weapons. They were made to kill in the original intention. They were made to take a life. So like they have to be respected, and I think that a lot of people getting into it, it's just they'll just whip it around and you're like, dude, like you're gonna get hurt. So I think the reverence for the weapon itself, for the history behind it, that's where my heart's at with it. And I'm fascinated by the history of not only Japanese weapon culture but just all of it in general is just exciting to me. So I always love when people from different schools or real practices or HEMA people like talk with me, because I absorb what they're saying and I'm excited about it. I'm like, you took the time to go and actually learn a school of, swordsmanship, and that's incredible. And I wish I could do that, but it just not work doesn't work for my lifestyle.
Yeah, and it's extremely difficult. Like I said, that's where it comes back to it being a luxury, and people being truly, like, this could sound crazy, like blessed to be close to one, right? Because it's not just
Yeah.
something you can go to your local gym and be like, hey, you get guys who swing swords around here? Yeah,
Yeah.
it's right after gym. It's just
They'd be
not.
like, get out of here.
Yeah, it's not going to happen. I when I was developing our Kyokai here, which is, a Kyokai is a remote study group that's an extension of a traditional dojo. We were trying to find a home, and we found a home, and it was a historical arts building that was protected by the city, and it was very affordable. And we thought this is fantastic. Like we're learning we're keeping an ancient martial art alive in a historical structure that's designed for exactly that.
Yeah.
And then someone decided to kind of roll the camera footage back one day, right? And they saw that we were using swords instead of bokken, and
No.
that
They
was the
lost
that
it.
was the last class that we had there.
Yeah.
So
That sucks.
um, there's definitely, keeping it alive is difficult, and not everybody has the luxury of having a dojo to be able to go to. I will say though that I think in kind of the post COVID world, and the increase of stuff that's now available on YouTube, not
For sure.
only from people like ourselves, but from actual schools and whatnot, because that's what they had to do to keep their dojos alive, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's awesome because there's definitely um, more information to be able to have, because the books are great and I have tons of them, Flashing Steel, all of those, but there's always going to be a step that's omitted from those photos.
Definitely.
There's always going to be a piece missing. So if anyone said, "Oh yeah, I learned such and such from so and so," okay, well show me.
Yeah.
All those little pieces, they're going to be missing, and someone's going to be able to call.
Totally.
Get
Yeah.
it. But
Well, I think one of the things that's cool is when people can. I enjoy when people can say like, "Hey, I've put in the work to attain this rank," and I always think that's impressive. Um, it's not something I'm opposed to either. I think it would be even cool and challenging to go, okay, this school doesn't teach this, but maybe I'll just go learn kendo so I can spar. Like those kind of things. Like it would be fun to get outside of my way of thinking and the way my brain works, because I think it's good for people. I think it's good to do new things. So like if the opportunity presents itself and I could do it, I probably would at some point. I think it would be enriching to learn a much more strict and traditional way of thinking and using the sword, because I might find that it enhances things even more. So I think it would be cool. I think people should, if they can and if their lifestyle permits it, even if it's not the way you do things forever. Like I probably will remain a backyard cutter at heart, and if I get some more traditional schooling, that'd be cool. But I don't think I will ever be like, I will never ever cut anything but tatami. It's like, because I don't know, I just think people need to be flexible, and we live in America. Tatami's expensive.
yeah,
So it's like,
and the cool thing is no one's gonna, well, no one should be telling you that you can't do that. You know what I
right.
mean? Like, and that's what's cool about, I think, all of our respective channels, right? And kind of everything that we do is everyone's found their niche and kind of the way that they do things, and they can tweak it a little bit. But at the end of the day, you say, hey, you know what? That really wasn't for me.
Yeah.
This is me. This is who I am. And this is what I'm comfortable with. And supporting everybody in that is, I think, the best way to keep everything alive, right? Like, for example, you could have someone who is a purist who might say that, if it's not Nihonto, it's not a sword.
Right.
And the fact of the matter is, if you want to have a school and you want to go to a school and you want to have students, not everybody's going to be able to afford that. And there
Right.
are valid options and alternatives these days. So, as much as some people might slam on the Chinese reproduction market, right? I guarantee you that market and that industry has kept more dojos
Yes.
alive than they probably have any idea. You know what I
Well, and
mean?
also going even further too, like that's a great point. I think there's a lot of times where a smith in Japan probably got a commission because someone picked up a Hanwei at one point and went, "This is really cool. I want the real thing too." Because I personally want the real thing. I'm like I'm in the process of saving up to get just a simple Wakizashi at this point, and I think it would be really cool to experience having one, but it doesn't need to be everybody's goal. Like, it is not cool, in my opinion, to slam on either side. Like, if someone's a purist and they're like, I respect the art, and it to me, it's not a katana if it's not a Nihoto. Cool, awesome. We're dope. But also don't clown on the guy who spent $200 because he really wanted to cut something and
Right.
have fun.
Right.
Because there's just it's a wide net. The net of like swordsmanship in general is just enormous. There's people from all over the world that do it differently, and I think that there's definitely I've noticed a little bit of a kind of keyboard warrior aspect to people from America when they comment on swordsmanship that I don't really see from other cultures. Like a lot of other cultures are just kind of like, "Cool, good job," and then in America they're like, "Well, what school do you study? Why are you doing it like this? Your foot's in the wrong place," and you're just kind of like, "Okay, bro, like relax," So I think it's such a massive net and with 1,000 different types of people in it. So it's cool, it's fun, and it's a totally different world for me than music. Like it's 100% a different world.
That's awesome. And
Yeah,
it's cool that you're able to find the time to have both of those in your life, right? You know, because it definitely, I wouldn't, me personally, I wouldn't want you going full sword and then the music stops, and I wouldn't want you to go full music and then the sword stuff stops, right?
no, I get
So,
that. Yeah.
so maintain that happy balance, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So, um, what is trying to get back to the original kind of Q&A session, just so
Yeah, for
people can
sure.
learn a little bit more about you, because I tend to go off on tangents, but um, do you have a favorite samurai film, live action?
um I forget which Kurosawa film it is, but any Kurosawa film is peak samurai. I think it's just like embodiment of just the energy in general. I forget what it's called. I think it's a specific one, and it has like just insane color. It was like one of the first ones to use.
So yeah, that would probably be either Kagemusha or Ron.
Ron, that's the one.
Yeah.
That's the one. That's one of my favorites. My dad showed me the Seven Samurai or the Seven Samurai when I was younger, and then I like loved just all of the different ones from that era. But that specific movie was like mind blowing as far as samurai stuff goes, especially just the colors were just wild. Like it
Yeah.
just looks unbelievable. And from an artistic standpoint, every shot in that movie is just a masterpiece. And it's so intentional. And I think that all of them really are like that. But just the intentional framing, being somebody who does video, I'm just always in awe.
Yeah. I mean, there were so many firsts that came in some of those films that a lot of people take for granted, right? Like the first use of uh, a slow motion action shot was in Seven Samurai, right?
Yeah.
It's just something we don't really think about that anymore.
Right.
It's just kind of
That's just
common,
part of
but
it now. But it didn't exist.
it was a new technique. That's awesome. I mean, for those of you, I see lots of, and I apologize. My first time doing this, there's been tons of chat activity, and I've been really bad at taking down a look and talking about some of it. I will get better at that, I promise. But I just wanted to say thank
I've
you to
only
all you
done.
guys who said that you were going to show up and you're here. And there's lots of music input here, and every single one of them I love, and I'm a personal fan of them. But I will throw a shout out right now, just since we're talking about this and we have all this feedback. If you do not follow Samurai versus Ninja on YouTube and Ninja versus Samurai on YouTube, you need to right away. Yes, Namiri Koshiro. That is a really weird one for me, and I ended up it's so weird, and there's different series of it. But I'm glad that Kingston brought that up, because I think it's Full Moon Killing number 2, and he's got this full moon cut that he does, and there's this little funny special effect, and about halfway through the film when he's doing it, and they're doing this weird flamenco guitar starts coming in. And it's like the weirdest. It just kind of made me think of Quentin Tarantino and some of the stuff that he does and his influences.
Yeah.
And I'm like, where did this flamenco guitar come into this samurai movie? But it totally worked. It totally
Yeah.
worked. So um, those definitely had a place for me. I think in high school, what really solidified that this was something I wanted to do was watching Seven Samurai and seeing the character development that they were able to do in these seven unique individuals that I feel like anybody watching that film can find a character in that film and kind of identify with that character on a personal
Totally.
level. Like,
Yeah,
that guy's like me, or oh, I know a guy who's like that guy.
for sure. They did just a good job of really bringing in humanity elements to the characters and just like pushing. I feel like they pushed the boundaries of what kind of a drama could be, which is amazing.
Yeah. Yep. And then I'm just taking a look here at some of the stuff. We've got a lot of these films to thank for a lot of uh, techniques and in filmography that we have. We've got lots of things that are now tropes in anime. We've got these old films to think of for some
That did it first. Yeah.
Exactly. And culturally the impact that they had on us. So what are some things that you haven't done yet in your sword life that are things that you'd like to see maybe in the near future, that you'd like to do in the near future or acquire in the near future? Kind of like, what's your roadmap, right, for the next couple of years or so?
Well, I'm kind of taking like I'm gonna take some time to work with what I have. I kind of just mad dash collected everything I thought I could get in a quick amount of time, and I'm just kind of like excited to really spend time with the collection I've gathered and learn more. I want to learn more, just study more things online, like of better ways to do, different ways to do noto, different ways to do like different techniques to swing. Like it's wild to see how from one school to another in kenjutsu it can be like a completely different body mechanic. And so I want to try to kind of like hone in on what my signature style is, even though I'm self-taught, but also just kind of like pull from different stuff. So I'm going to be leaning more into kind of my own, I guess you could say, kata in a sense, just like
Mhm.
practicing maybe. And another thing I want to be able to do is just, at least from video, mimics a traditional kata and perform it. And I would like to be able to do that because I think it kind of gives me a little bit more just of just an understanding of other people's styles. And so I'd like to do that. I do actually want to cut more tatami because I think I'm at that point now where I have enough really sharp swords that I can definitely do that. So I've bought tatami a couple different times, but it was really fun to cut because it was such a different medium. It's like there's a like kind of impact to it that you just don't get with other stuff. So the couple times I've cut tatami mats, it was exhilarating and really fun, and I want to get better at it. So that is probably something I'll save up for since I'm kind of at a stopping point with my sword collection. I feel great about it. I have so many different kinds now, and so for me, I'm probably just going to lean more into studying more intently, and then also just investing in more like the tatami cutting targets. But that's kind of about it. I don't have much like, I guess, forward thinking with it. With music, it's probably more just keep making ambient. It's fun.
Well, it's you know, it, I don't think your plan is a bad thing at all. In fact, I think it's probably a great thing, right? Because now you have a lot of different tools at your disposal. You're going to find, which tool really sings to you the best, right? And then you're going to get better at that. One thing I also like to do is I like to see every different school's interpretation of basically what is the same thing, right? Like the at least the first three Ido kata are almost all the same, but you're going to see this school's bato is a little bit different. This school's noto is a little bit different. And it's kind of interesting to see those things side by side and be like, well, I wonder why they did it that way. Was it because, that school used particularly longer swords at that point in time? Did they use shorter swords? Did they, so all that stuff is really interesting. And, as a kyokai, as a remote studier of something, you're encouraged to actually look at other styles, methods of those things as a form of comparing to your own. So I almost think of it as like, someone who goes to school for theology, right? They kind of study everything, right?
Yeah, for
There's
sure.
a lot of overlaps in some instances, but everybody kind of has their own unique take on it. So I think it's the same way with Kenjutsu and Iaido. So I'm kind of in the same boat as you are. When I start posting the kata videos, they're gonna look terrible, right? But the videos aren't about like how good I am, right? The videos are about like if you're someone that's in the middle of this and you have this sword, what does that sword do for you, right? And you'd see the differences between a 26-inch blade and a 30-inch blade, and how you have to kind of maybe tweak your body just a little bit different. So I think that's a solid plan.
I'm seeing some chats, some info on mats. Who is it? Jade OK82 saying,
Yep.
21 mats for 150. Ooh, that's good.
I believe, and Jade, that's they're the guys out of Tucson, right? We'll see if he replies back on that.
Yeah. Speaking on what Carl's saying, I was blown away when I first saw his videos. Just the execution of his form into cutting. It's like it's seamless, and it's really that inspired me to not. He cuts while he's in his exact form, so it's super cool to watch Katana Carl cut tatami because it looks exactly like his Iaido, and I think that's incredible, and it's just really cool. And that inspired me in the way that I move around. I'm like, I don't want to just stand and then just like cut. I want to move with the target as if I'm in a fight, in a sense. And so the milk jugs and stuff make that a lot easier than tatami because you kind of have to step up to them and they have a totally different kind of feel. They're almost like a flesh target that you're aiming for. Versus the tatami is just like as if a guy stood in front of you and you just cut him up. So there's definitely a pro and con to both, but I was inspired by him when I first saw his channel. Katana Carl's like just excellent at cutting tatami. It doesn't even look like anything happened and it just falls. It's cool.
Yep, and it's most of these swords, right, from the $150 price point up to that $1,500 price point we're talking about. I mean, they're all going to cut, right?
Yep.
The sword cuts, right?
It's sharp.
Yeah, the sword cuts. It's your form, right? Or it should be your form and how difficult or easy that cut is, right? As well as if you have any biffs, you know what I mean, right? So I also agree that there's some pretty incredible videos out there of cutting on all sorts of targets too.
For sure.
I mean, you can tell if you have a non-traditional target and you're powering through it, you'll know that, right?
Yeah.
You'll know like, hey, I'm kind of like I baseball bat that thing. you know what I mean? But that's what you were talking about is how you start to feel the differences, right? And you start getting that feedback in your hands and in the body and the sound and whatnot. So.
I would say everybody in this chat is excellent at cutting. just to say that because they're talking about it, but it's inspiring every time I see you guys like do your thing. I learn from all of you every single time. Like Gargoyle, Tempest, Ghost, Eric Hussein, like all of you. It's cool, and I think that's why I think this community is so cool is because I continuously get inspired, and that's kind of hard to find. It's a lot of the online communities are toxic as all hell, so it's definitely cool to be, involved. And I think I appreciate the, open arms in a sense.
I'll throw this out there for everybody who's in here, yourself included, right? I'm sure the one interest group or another, we've all seen how people on social media occasionally, influencers on different channels or whatnot, will get together and do something in a group, right?
Yeah,
We should just have a mad cutting day one day where we all meet up in one part and we have all these targets set up, right? And we just all start cutting and have someone with a
that'd be
drone
so
or
fun.
somebody fly by down the line and just film all these cuts happening, right? We should totally get everybody together and do that at one point in time.
That'd be wild, like a whole convention type thing.
Well, I know there was that video that just came out of the guy who did like the most number of cuts and like he got a Guinness Book of World Records. I think it was a guy in Europe somewhere, and he had like some crazy Damascus sword that they made for him, right? But I'm pretty sure we could probably get the most simultaneous cuts with the Japanese style sword at one
Like
point in
from a
time.
bunch of people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure we could probably get into the Guinness Book of World Records at that point. So
The toothpick challenge. What is that? I need to know what that is, Gargoyle.
yeah, I don't know what that one is. That sounds scary.
Yeah, speaking of longsword, Tempest is absolutely ridiculous with the European longsword. He can do like doubles and triple cuts like on anything. It's cool. He's fast as all hell.
That is something that I'm at one point in time I'm probably going to acquire, but I'm very afraid to do so.
Me too.
And I know you know why.
The double edge freaks me out.
Well, I mean, not only that, but it's like I don't know what to do with this thing,
I
right?
know.
I'm gonna be banging it up,
I feel like
and
people
then also not wanting to get hooked.
I feel like people think they're the same, but they just seem completely different to me. Like a katana versus a longsword.
Cut a mat with a toothpick in it and get close to it without cutting the toothpick. Oh, okay.
Whoa. Yeah, I feel like I saw that video, Carl, of you guys a while ago doing one with like Hussein was there too, which is cool.
Yeah, we definitely should put something put something together. Carl Palooza. Yeah, we should start taking you know start taking names for it at this point. But
Carl Palooza, I like that. The Michigan meetup.
yep. Um, well, I probably have to bring this to a close
That's
a little
fine.
bit
No problem.
here, but I just wanted to again. I wanted to thank you for not only your contribution to the music world, right, but your contribution to the Japanese sword arts world, right, and everything we do on the web, all of us, everybody in this chat, whether we think so or not, it helps keep these companies alive, which in turn is probably going to help keep these arts alive or food on someone's table. You know what I mean? And everything we do contributes. So whether you're buying the $100 blades, $150 blades, or you're buying the $1,500 blades, we all have a place, and we're all keeping it alive. So I just want to thank you all. Thank you all for being here with us. And Tone, again, thank you for taking time out of your day to talk with me and share some of your journey. It's been really cool, and I hope it resonates with some people in this.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm psyched about it. I think it's going to be a great year for sure.
Awesome. And again, everybody in the chat that showed up, thank you guys I know it's an hour is a long time to sit here and watch, two dudes talk back and forth to each other. So hopefully we weren't too boring for you. But if anybody else, you're all in this chat here, I've talked to you at some point in time, one or another. if you want to join me for something similar, or if you want to do something specific and have a specific topic that you want to talk about, I'm totally all about that. Like I know, I'm not coming from the backyard world. I'm coming from a different side, but we always can blend and meet and share
Totally.
things. You know, something I'd like to do in the future, and it might be something you like to do, is katana reiki, right? That's my favorite part of class. Is not even wearing my sword or swinging my sword. My favorite part of class is, taking my sword out, putting it down in front of me, bowing to it, and just respecting everything that that sword means. And I'd love to share that with people that maybe haven't had that opportunity to do that. At the same time, I'd love to learn from people, how do you set up targets in your backyard? How do
Yeah,
you make stands? Like, I think those are all things we can all share and collaborate on.
for sure. It's definitely a wide net, so it's cool. Everyone comes from such different walks of life, and we all have like, I think the sword is binding us together in a really cool way. So yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. I hope you guys have a fantastic weekend, and hope to see you again soon. Take care, everybody.